Thanks to the awesome support we've had since we announced that we're going to Norway to race the Finnmark Slopa, we've been able to raise enough money to start booking tickets to actually take the dog team over there. So I want to take a quick look at kind of the flight pattern and what we're getting laid out to move myself and 16 dogs over to Norway to get ready for this race. So we are officially taking off for Norway on February 8th, which is super exciting to have that in the bag. We have a schedule now. So on February 8th, me and 8 dogs are going to go down to Wasilla and do a vet check. This is the first step. So all the dogs are going to get a dewormer, which has to be given between 20 and 120 hours of arriving in Norway. They're going to have their health certificate, which is a vet inspection by just any vet can do this, give them a health inspection, and this health certificate allows them to travel on the airplanes. They're also going to go to the USDA vet, which signs off on all their paperwork so that we know that the paperwork's in order and there's not going to be a problem when we arrive in Norway. Once that's done, I go to the airport with 4 of those dogs and I head for Norway. To get 4 dogs checked into an airport is a bit of a process. It's hard enough when you got a couple bags to lug through the airport, but when you have 4 big sled dogs and crates, you're going to need some help. So this is actually a 3-person job. 1 person drives the car, 2 people hop out with the dogs and transfer the dogs, 2 on leashes, and 1 person pulling 2 crates over to the bag check area, get them checked in, get them over to TSA who inspects the crates. We get the dogs inside there, zip tie the doors, and they're ready to fly. So me and those 4 dogs, once we're all checked in Anchorage, are going to fly down to Seattle, which is only about a 3-hour flight. And there we're going to meet our Seattle Dream Team. We got a great group of people here. They're going to pick us up at the airport and take us to their home where the dogs get to spend the night romping around in the yard. The next morning, they take me back to the airport now that the dogs and I are rested up, and we're going to fly from Seattle to Reykjavik, Iceland. Very short layover there, and then over to Oslo right there. Those dogs get to stay at the nonstop headquarters just a few hours outside of Oslo, and they'll be resting up while I make several more trips. The next day, or actually I'm sorry, that same day on February 9th, Jesse gets to be red, is going to be doing the same process in Anchorage with 4 more dogs, flying down to Seattle, meeting the Seattle Dream Team, so those dogs can get rested up for the next flight the following day. On the 10th, Jesse's going to go back to the airport, take those same 4 dogs through the whole airport process to Reykjavik, and then over to Oslo. Now we have 4 dogs sitting in Oslo. All right, so the next day is the 11th. Again, because of the short time frame that you have to do the dewormer and the health certificates before traveling and arriving in Norway, we can now take the second 8 dogs to the vet. So this is on the 11th. 8 dogs have to go down to Anchorage. Now Jesse and I, we're over here in Norway, so this is going to take Rick and some of the help at the kennel. They go to Anchorage, get ready to go, and Rick gets to be blue. He's going to load up 4 dogs and fly down to Norway. Meanwhile, I'm black, is going to fly from Oslo back to Reykjavik, from Reykjavik back to Seattle. I meet Rick in Seattle with those 4 dogs. Me and those 4 dogs spend the night. Rick, sorry, you have to fly back to Anchorage that same day. So he's back in Anchorage. The next morning, things get really hectic here on the 12th. We're going to start with Jesse. He's stuck in Norway. Jesse comes back from Norway to Reykjavik, from Reykjavik back over to Seattle. That same day, I'm black, I leave Seattle with 4 dogs that are all rested up, through Reykjavik, back over to Oslo. There we go. Rick, he got to go through the whole process in Anchorage again. He took 4 more dogs from Anchorage to Seattle. He met Jesse in Seattle, Jesse coming from Oslo, Rick coming from Anchorage. Rick gets to turn around and fly back to Anchorage. Jesse takes those 4 dogs to spend the night in Seattle. The next morning, Jesse, I think we're on the 13th now, Jesse's going to fly that last gang of dogs over to Reykjavik, over to Oslo. We now have 16 dogs in Oslo. Jesse and I are going to be pretty tired at this point, but the dogs, each flight for them is pretty easy. They fly 3 hours, spend the night, spend the next day flying over to Oslo. After that, they're playing around in a dog yard in Norway while we're flying back and forth halfway around the world. Once the dogs are positioned in Oslo and Jesse and I get a day or so to rest up, we're going to be heading north to Alta. This was a drive that took us 34 hours last year. This year, it's going to take us about 48 hours because we're going to be stopping even more to be able to run the dogs, get them out to exercise. Generally, when you're doing a long road trip with dogs, it's about 4 to 5 hours of driving, and then you're going to stop for anywhere from an hour to 4 or 5 hours to either let the dogs out to go to the bathroom or actually go out and exercise them for a real run. So by the 18th of February, all of these dogs will have made it to Norway in Oslo, and then we're going to go driving all the way up here to Alta, where the race actually starts. So there we'll be settled in, getting ready for the race. Now, thus far, we've been able to book all these tickets, from Seattle to Reykjavik to Oslo. That's all locked in. There's really only one flight a day that works for our schedule, that keeps it as short as possible for the dogs in this section. For this section here, this is our next project between Anchorage and Seattle. So we're hoping to be able to get those tickets booked soon, but on those flights, there's several flights a day, so we can usually find empty spots to be able to get the dogs down there. But that's the next task before us, is get the finances lined out, get Anchorage to Seattle booked, and then that's all the dogs to Norway. Once the race is over, we get to do it all over again in reverse to bring 16 dogs back to Alaska. So that's the process of moving 16 dogs across the U.S., across the Atlantic, over to Norway, all the way to the north of Norway to be able to compete in the Finnmarksløpet.